Welcome to Flashpoints. I'm Jeff Pegues, joined once again by CBS News senior national security analyst Juan Zarate.
Good seeing you, Jeff.
Nice to see you too. This attack in Garland, Texas, of course it was thwarted. ISIS has come out and claimed responsibility. Were these two men inspired by ISIS or directed by ISIS?
Well, I don't think we know yet for sure. What we do know is that ISIS has been trying to inspire activists around the world to attack in place, something you and I have talked about at length, Jeff. And so this appears to be that kind of an incident where the message of ISIS, the radical ideology that foments this kind of violence, may have animated their work. ISIS is also trying to find propaganda victories, trying to proclaim that their banner is spread around the world. And so they're going to claim whatever they can. But we'll just have to see whether or not there was more to the connection between ISIS and these two other than just inspiration.
Mm-hmm. What about these types of attacks? They're criticized. There's been a lot of criticism of law enforcement in this country. Did they miss something here? Because we know that they were following one of the suspects, Elton Simpson. He's been on their radar since about 2006. Did they miss something here?
Well, I don't think they did, because what you had was Simpson sort of on the map. They attempted to prosecute him for material support to terrorism. He was not convicted for that, convicted for false statements, was put on probation. Then he kind of fell off the radar, but he began to grow more active in the context of the Islamic State. He was up on social media, and that triggered attention yet again from federal authorities. And so they were on top of it. But the challenge, Jeff, as you know in your fine reporting, is how does law enforcement actually predict when somebody who's suspicious may have sympathies for a terrorist group or its ideology? When do they grow active? When do they decide to act? And I think that's really the trick here. It wasn't just the problem here. We've seen it in case after case in the U.S., but also in France, where the Charlie Hebdo attackers had been on the radar screen of French authorities, had these ties to groups throughout the world, and simply sort of were not on the radar at the moment of the attack. And so the challenge for law enforcement, not just in the U.S. but around the world, is how do you identify these suspects who may have ties well back a decade, but suddenly are reanimated by the current environment or even a group like the Islamic State? That's really tricky, and I think that's what we're going to see in this instance.
And, you know, something else that's interesting, Nadir Soufi, the other suspect, he wasn't on their radar. That sort of perhaps raises some concerns as well.
That's right, and now what you're going to have happen from both the FBI and the intelligence community is looking at the rings and networks of relationships that these two individuals had. And I think a concern will be, have we missed somebody or something in that network? And are we doing enough, especially with these folks who are being reanimated, these suspects from the past that may not have done anything in the past but may now? Are we looking deeply enough at their networks to understand where there may be active cells ready to attack? Question here too is whether or not you can be more predictive when you have an event like this, where you knew that there was likely going to be some jihadi attention to an event that was intended to sponsor the cartoon images of Muhammad. That in some ways is a honey trap for bad guys. And so law enforcement, I think, is going to dissect this a bit to see if they can do some other things a bit better to predict where these incidents will happen. But it's not easy. Does
law enforcement have the resources to keep up with all of these potential threats that seem to be popping up?
No. I mean, the reality is no, because there is no 100% security. There's no foolproof plan to prevent any individual from being violent for whatever reason. I mean, we've seen this in the school shooting cases. We've seen this in other violent terrorist attacks that aren't violent Islamic extremism, and it's hard in the context of violent extremism. Even when you know individuals have traveled, for example, to Yemen or Syria and come back, it's not often easy to determine, okay, are these individuals really intent on attacking in the country? And we don't have a system, despite all the caricatures of the American counterterrorism program, that you can just lock up people because you think they're suspicious. It doesn't work that way, and especially when you're talking about American citizens. And so it's a difficult job. Law enforcement is under-resourced, and they're facing the challenge of needing to look at social media and new technologies to try to be more predictive and more analytic in where they devote their resources.
And I think it also bears mentioning that they've had a lot of successes as well, thwarting attacks.
Absolutely,
in
and
this country.
people forget that. You know, the successful sting operations and other operations that law enforcement and intelligence undertake frequently don't get the headlines.
You're right. Juan Zarate, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
Nice to see you.
Likewise.
As always, that is Flashpoints.